All righty. So, techniques for local implementation. This is a basket of techniques that helps with taking the plan, the local waterfront revitalization plan, and making it into a program. So whenever you see the letters LWRP related to these documents we're talking about, the last letter P is program, because it's the collection of a plan and all the techniques to implement it. So in section 5 is the part that makes it a program and not just a plan without implementation measures. So what does this include? We're going to talk about existing local laws and regulations, new laws and regulations that are necessary for implementing the LWRP. There's other public and private actions that we'll talk about. A local management structure is needed to make sure you have a process in place for reviewing actions for consistency with the LWRP. Then there's a subsection, guidelines for notification and review. So this is a procedure for state agencies and federal agencies to follow to coordinate with the LWRP. So we'll talk about that. That's a standard section we provide. Financial resources, and then a summary chart that we'll talk about that relates the policies to the LWRP. Why do we need legal tools? Why are we talking about local laws for the LWRP? Well, this is, if we go back to what we learned in section 3, session 4 of our training, but section 3 of the LWRP, those coastal policies and ones that are revised for inland waterways are enforceable statements of action. And the purpose of them is to support our goals, promoting the beneficial use of coastal and inland waterway resources, preventing the impairment of those resources, or some of the policies address major activities that can have a substantial effect on our local resources. So the way we enforce those coastal policies is by federal and state laws. If you remember in section 3, we talked about how each of those policy statements, the 44 or the 13 in Long Island Sound, each word in those policies is based on state laws. So state laws are one of the enforcement mechanisms for the policies, especially for the water resource policies. Then your local laws also enforce those enforceable statements of action in section 3. So that's what we're going to talk about for section 5. So what should those local land use laws and regulations do in order to support the LWRP? So you want to ensure that new waterfront development that's proposed is well designed and sited in your community. You want to ensure that public access to the water is provided even when new development is being proposed or alongside the new development or as part of the development. We want to make sure that water dependent uses aren't displaced by uses which don't require a waterfront location. Josh talked a lot about that last week with section 4. This is a key, a core idea of the LWRP. We want to, see that if you can make your local land use regulations help with the objectives of state regulations that protect natural areas, for example, wetland laws, and then prevent damage from flooding, erosion, and rising water levels. So those are all things to look for in your local land use regulations and strive for. So what do we put in section 5? First, the narrative should describe the existing local laws that you have on the books to implement the LWRP. You can look back at what's been inventoried in section 2, but section 5 should be more in-depth. So if you're picking which section to do a more in-depth discussion of the laws, that would be in section 5. Section 2 basically lists them and some basic information about them. So for example, the zoning law in section 2 would list what the districts are. Section 5 would talk more about what they do and how they relate to the policies. Then determine whether the laws implement the current land use plan or whether they need any amendments for what your vision is for the LWRP. For example, the zoning law. should describe zoning districts and how uses in the district supports the policies in section 3. This is a photo of the village of Clayton, up north on the St. Lawrence River. And they had a proposed development of the Harbor Hotel, as some of you may have been there. And when that hotel was put in, they required the developer to provide public access. The hotel is right to the left of that photo, but a really nice public access walkway was provided as part of that whole plan. Then any relevant local laws should be included in an appendix to the LWRP. Then second, describe new local laws to implement the LWRP. So what would those be? The first one is a waterfront consistency review law. We're going to go into more depth about that in just a minute. Amendments to the zoning law, site plan review, or subdivision law. An example is in the town of Alexandria and village of Alexandria Bay up on the St. Lawrence River. They made a revision amendment to site plan review in relation to review of waterfront structures such as the historic boathouses they have there. Harbor management law is something that's required to implement the harbor management plan. And a couple of examples of that in the city of Plattsburgh, they had a mooring law, but it was actually annulled by the courts in 2015 because there's a private marina next to the new city marina, and some different things were not totally agreed upon, and the mooring law was annulled. So they have to adopt a new harbor management law as part of their LWRP. In the village of Sackett's Harbor, which has just completed their LWRP amendment, they updated their waterfront management law. You know, sometimes there's different titles to these in different communities, but it's basically a local law that that regulates docks, structures, uses on the water side of the LWRP. So in Sackett's Harbor, they had a law and they updated it with some clearer enforcement provisions that will help them with the busy boating that goes on in the summer in Sackett's Harbor. So drafts of these proposed laws should be included in an appendix to the draft LWRP. And then final LWRP. So a little bit more about the waterfront consistency review law. So this is required to implement the LWRP. What it is, it's local review for consistency with the LWRP policies. You know, before if you don't have an LWRP in your communities in the coastal area of New York State, a proposed action is reviewed by the state. When you have an LWRP, the proposed action needs to be reviewed at the local level to be consistent with your LWRP. At the state level, it's consistent with Article 42, 600 regs, and the Coastal Management Program. So we provide 3 model consistency laws for your use. One has the 44 policies for coastal area LWRPs. For Long Island Sound, since they have their own regional subset of the CMP, the Coastal Long Island Coastal Management Program, that has 13 policies. We made a template with the 13 policies for the consistency law. And then there's one that we slightly revised some of the policies to better work with designated inland waterways. So all those 3 templates are now in the guidance document that's online available for you. So it's a really good thing that we did. And a little bit more about the consistency law. What does it include? So it has, under definitions, it includes minor actions that are exempt from review. So it's similar to seeker in that not everything, you know, painting your house is not subject to review. So it lists those actions that are exempt from review. Then it includes procedures. So every community is different. So you can put in there which local board is going to do the review, which is it the code enforcement officer or another individual that will, accept applications, or the planning board who is responsible for that review. Then it lists the 44 policies or the 13 policies, so that shows clearly that the proposed development is going to be reviewed against each of those policies as it goes through the process. And then to make it a little easier, there's a waterfront assessment form. So the developer should fill out that form and submit that to the community along with their application. It's similar, kind of, but shorter than an EAF under seeker. So I think I have just a example of that here. So this is the first page of what we call the CAF, the Coastal Assessment Form, which is part of the local consistency law. And it starts with instructions that this is to be submitted with actions that are subject to the LWRP that are in the waterfront revitalization area defined in the LWRP. And states that the preparer should review the policies in the LWRP, which sometimes, they might not be aware of it. So this clearly says that proposed project applicant should do that. And then has some more questions about describing the nature of the action, again, similar to an environmental assessment form under seeker, but a little shorter and more compact. Then it goes into some questions. So, for example, first one is, will the proposed action be located within or contiguous to have an adverse effect on any of the resource areas found in the waterfront area as identified in the LWRP? So yes or no, and then specifically the significant fish or wildlife habitats that we've talked about that are mapped. And if they're present in the LWRP, scenic resources, important agricultural lands, natural protective features, would have an effect on the scenic quality, development of future existing water dependent uses, as we said. So these are, straightforward questions about the development and how it will affect the waterfront area. And these are all related to the coastal policies, these questions, coastal and in the waterway policies. So it's a way for the review board to quickly look and see, is this action going to have an effect? So this helps streamline the process for reviewing actions in the waterfront revitalization area. So I think, as I've already said a little bit, how does this work? The developer submit actions to the whichever board has been designated. For example, if a new marina is proposed, the action is reviewed by the board. The coastal assessment form should be submitted as part of the application. The board would find it consistent or not with the policies. And then similar to, say, site plan review, they would coordinate with the planning and zoning board if it was a separate board that did the coastal assessment. If it is the planning board, they would just do it along with their regular review of that action. Many communities designate the planning board as the agency to do it. Other boards have the village board or the town board. Other places have a waterfront advisory committee. So the templates for the law that we provide have options in there. You pick which option you like and then put in the words for your community. And if there's a federal permit, our Department of State Consistency staff also will review the action. We're going to talk about the coordination of that in a couple of minutes. So that was a little bit about the consistency law. So what about improving other land use tools? In addition to the ones that are required, we have a resource that we developed a few years ago. I'm not sure if some of you may have heard about this, called Model Local Laws to Increase Resilience. This was a requirement in the Community Resource and Resiliency Act, CARA, which was passed by the state legislature in 2014. This is a very big resource. It has over 400 pages and 5 chapters. of sample and local laws and different ways to approach resiliency through the local land use tool suite in your community. So the first chapter is basic land use tools for resiliency, including zoning, setbacks, subdivision site plan review. Second chapter is wetland and water course protection measures, setbacks, buffers, overlay districts. Third is coastal shoreline protection measures, which includes high erosion areas, setbacks, buffers, alternatives to hard structures. Then fourth chapter is management of floodplain development, limiting development, overlay districts, design flood elevations. And then the last one is stormwater control measures. And there's a link there. It's on our website. You can search for model local laws to increase resilience to find it. That might be the easiest way. Just a little bit more about these model local laws for your reference. So the models were created from both existing model laws, and then most of them were actually examples of laws that are already on the books in our communities. So what we did is we combined sections from different laws, sometimes from a couple of different communities, using our professional expertise. And we have instructions in there about how to adapt them for local use. So they can be plug-in sections to update your existing laws, or you can use the entire model law for topics not currently addressed. So it's not a one size fits all. You might want to just amend your definitions section with some of these really good definitions in one of these models, or you might want to amend your site plan review standards. So there's lots of different things to choose from in this resource. Each model law includes the title, background, and purpose of the law, information about the subject, and references. There's a lot of references in there. And then which existing local laws should be amended with this particular model or section of a law, or whether it should be adopted as a whole new law, for example, a wetlands law. And then it says where it was adapted from, the municipality that it came from. And sometimes some of these came from other states or programs that we thought were really good. And then it includes the local law language, of course. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples from each of the chapters. It's a lot of reading. If you wanted to read the whole thing, it's a good way to go to sleep. But there's a lot of really good resources in here. So this will just give you a flavor of what's in there. If you're looking for a particular thing, that you'll know where you can start. So in the basic land use tools, there's a model local law called Waterfront Overlay District. And that one was adapted from the town of Lloyd on the Hudson River, and it integrates with their LWRP. They thought it was a good idea to have an overlay district with additional regulations along the Hudson River, so that's what they did. Another idea is a waterfront bluff overlay district. Actually, I'm sorry, the waterfront bluff overlay district was the town of Lloyd. Then the first one, waterfront overlay district, it was from the town of Saugerties. So just two different overlay district ideas. Then minimum lot size or maximum lot coverage. So those are ways to make sure that impervious surfaces don't cover the entire lot, and you can get stormwater infiltration into the ground and protection of runoff, increased runoff from lots into your water bodies that you're trying to protect. And so the last one came from the City of New Rochelle zoning law, the maximum lot coverage. The next chapter, or next part of that chapter, is wetland protection measures. Or actually, I'm sorry, yeah. So the second chapter is wetland and water course protection measures. So it starts with wetland protection measures. And this includes simple wetland setbacks that was adapted from the town of Ulysses, New York, and defines the number of feet for those setbacks. But in your community, you could vary that and put in the number of feet that you think is appropriate. It's a way for you to be slightly more strict than DEC if you would like to do that for your community and protecting your water resources. There's a wetlands buffer that was adapted from the town of Coxsackie, New York. They're actually working on their LWRP right now. Wetland Conservation Overlay District. Overlay districts are used a lot in the model local laws. A lot of communities are using these now to add additional provisions that are laid over the base zoning district, but additional provisions for review for the particular resource. And then a local wetland law, if you want to go, you know, the Cadillac version and adapt wetland law. There's one in there, a full wetland law adapted from the town of Pauling, Dutchess County, where this picture is from. And then watercourse protection measures are include simple watercourse setbacks, stream-related zoning standards, another overlay district, watercourse overlay district. We actually have one of those in my town in Dover in Dutchess County, where we have additional provisions that overlaying the 10-mile river in our community for protection. And then a local watercourse law is also included in that section. And when I say adapted from that each community that I mentioned, we basically took out the community name, took out the name of, say, the code enforcement officer, and then left blanks in there where you can fill in your community name, whoever's your review board, and that type of thing. So you can vary it to your own needs. Then coastal shoreline protection measures. Another thing I want to mention is each one of these chapters in the beginning has a couple pages of background on that resource. So, for example, coastal the streams and wetlands. There's a chart in the beginning of each chapter that compares 6 or 8 ideas from different communities that are then laid out in that chapter, you know, about what the difference between those 6 or 8 laws. So it's a really good resource. The coastal shoreline protection measures focus is primarily on the coast, but also includes some background information and examples that are related to inland waterways. The introduction to this chapter has a good discussion of the hierarchy of shoreline alternatives, management alternatives that we're trying to achieve. So starting with the developers should prove why they can't use non-structural and natural features. Then next, they need to alter the shore, but can they use nature-based features? And then why are they proposing structural measures as a last resort? So it has a good discussion of that whole concept in the beginning of this chapter. And then there's a model local law that uses a hierarchy like that to review projects and has a process for how to do that. There's also a special use permit alternatives analysis that requires the applicants to demonstrate why taking no action or using natural features or nature-based features would be insufficient to protect the shoreline from risks. And accounting for DEC sea level rise projections is one of the standards for approval in that example local law. Then management of floodplain development is the next chapter. And this has a lot of good ideas for if your community wants to be stricter than FEMA, you know, the standard FEMA firm related local flood damage prevention law. So it includes another overlay district, a floodplain and wetland resource conservation overlay district that we actually have in my town, along with our stream corridor overlay district. And then also model local law to establish design flood elevation. So this is a really good idea where your community can establish a standard for base flood elevations. You know, it would need to be based on science, which part of your communities flood periodically and always flood more than the 100-year floodplain. But then the community can define a base flood elevation that's higher than the base flood elevation shown on the FEMA firm maps. And then that can be set out in law so that the 2 feet above base flood elevation is actually higher than it would be if you use the firms. And again, it would be based on research and documenting those areas of the community where it often floods. And also down on the left bottom corner is a reminder that the community rating system that FEMA has available for communities gives points when the community has additional protections, such as local laws that require a higher design flood elevation. And when you can get points in the CRS for things like that, things like education, things like moving your critical facilities out of the floodplain, there's a whole suite of things. And then when you get enough points, you can reduce the flood insurance premiums for the people in your community. It's a process and needs somebody to manage it, but it's very beneficial if you can do it. And then the last chapter in these model local laws to increase resilience is green infrastructure and stormwater management. It starts out with 2 ideas to help control steep slopes, because they're often some of the major problems in our communities, and especially in our rural communities. There's another overlay district for steep slopes that you could look at if you have a lot of steep slopes in your community. That one came from the town of Owasco, New York, and defines steep slopes as 15% or greater. And then erosion and stormwater, erosion and sediment control and stream corridor management provisions comes from the town of Geneseo, New York. Another idea for stricter provisions for helping with erosion. So I just wanted to give an example of how these model local laws would be used if you were to pick one for your community. I picked the coastal shoreline protection measures one, which I think is really good if you're on the coast. So it's called a special use permit shoreline alternatives analysis. And the purpose of this is to promote the use of the natural or nature-based methods along the shoreline when you're doing a site plan review or special use permits. So the purposes of the law are set out, which we always need to have a purpose in the law, recognizing the effects of what structural measures do in terms of eroding adjacent properties next to those structural measures. That's been documented over time, and that's what happens, and evaluate whether more beneficial options could be used. So the first step would be to amend the zoning law. And you would identify zoning districts where shoreline management activities could be regulated using this analysis. For example, this community has a waterfront residential district in the blue and right on the bluff on Lake Ontario. So this community hasn't done this, but I just took this as an example map that this is where you could possibly decide that you'd like to regulate shoreline management with the changes in the local law. And then you would amend the usage table in the specific districts. So you would add shoreline management measures, installation or restoration as a use, and then add it in the different districts. So the districts are along the top here in this community, and then the uses are on the left, going up and down. So you would add that it's a use permitted by special use permit. So as SP in the usage table. Then you would amend the definition section of the zoning law to define these features we're talking about. Natural features, and we provide these in the model local laws, and these are things the Department of State worked on when we worked on the model local laws. So you would include that definition in your zoning law. Nature-based features are the ones that are installed, but they're based on nature, so that definition would be included in the zoning law. So this picture is of a living shoreline in the Shinnecock Reservation down on Long Island. So that's nature-based features. And then non-structural management measures. These are things like elevating, flood-proofing, or relocating development. So that would be a definition that would be added. Then finally, the structural shoreline measures. Groins, jetties, breakwaters, bulkheads, levees. So this would also have a definition. So it's clear what you're talking about in this hierarchy of measures to be reviewed in a development. Then you would also amend the special use permit provisions. So the application for a special use permit for shoreline management would be what documentation you want them to provide, analysis of the alternatives, including, what's the purpose of the project. And then they would have to submit a clear range of alternative designs and sites and how they're going to affect natural features, water quality, erosion, flood control, and they should lay out no action. Why do they need to do anything? Natural features, nature-based features, and structural measures. So each time in each of those levels, they have to demonstrate that the previous level is not sufficient to address flood or erosion risks. Then a second step after amending the zoning law, the fee schedule, which may be in the zoning law, you may have it in a separate, the community may have it in a separate part of your code, but this helps pay for that additional review by the municipality. So you can add a provision in the zoning law so that an engineering review fee can be established by the municipality and to request the developer do that additional analysis. So then you would go ahead, use that alternatives analysis to review the proposed project based on the information the developer has provided. And I put this picture in here. This is an example of when I was on the zoning board in my town, and there was a subdivision that had been on the books for many years with lots in the 100-year floodplain of the 10-Mile River, which before we had the overlay district. And this developer was able to engineer the house and apply for a letter of map amendment from FEMA showing that he was able to put in fill and raise the house above the floodplain. But the problem is they built it. We had a flood, and it wasn't even a hurricane. It was just one of those years where there were lots of spring rains, like this year. And the house is, surrounded by a moat. And the septic system on the left there hadn't even been installed yet. This is a septic tank. So you can do all you want to show that it's out of the floodplain, but the water's still going to come. And I voted against this one on the zoning, but they asked for a variance. I voted against it, but the other members voted for it. So anyway, that's the consequence of regulations that don't do what they should. And now that we have the overlay district, there's more protections for development like this. So that was a lot about local laws, existing, ones that are needed, and then ideas for resilience. This section that should also be in section 5 is other public and private actions necessary to implement the LWRP. So this includes things like public authorities. A local development corporation is one idea, or a harbor district, these different mechanisms. Programs like a rehabilitation assistance and support. Land uses in proposed projects. So what's happening adjacent to your waterfront revitalization area on lands owned by a county, state or even the federal government, which might affect your waterfront revitalization area. So is there a state facility, and how are you coordinating with them? Is it positive or negative, or what can be done to improve coordination with those entities? And then private actions. So just to point out that our LWRP program does not fund private development. Empire State Development does. But the LWRP program, we only fund publicly accessible projects on public property or easements purchased by the municipality. But the LWRP can talk about proposed private development, and partnerships with local nonprofits, and how that's related to the actions the community wants to take. The local management structure is the next subsection that should be in section 5. And this should be done in coordination with how you write that local waterfront consistency review law. So the two things, this will be a narrative about that management structure that will be laid out in the local waterfront consistency review law. Who's going to accept the applications? What board is going to do the review? Who's the lead agency? And that person that's going to be the local administrator, and the overall management and coordination of the LWRP, and may assign certain responsibilities for management of the program. Who's going to write grant applications, for example? This section should also outline those procedures, as I said, for the local consistency review. So it was a narrative about the consistency review law. And then also, along with that, summarize the seeker procedures that your community follows. Seeker, just to note that adoption of the LWRP is a type 1 action, and DOS is an involved agency. So this is talking about how seeker works when you're developing the LWRP, but you'll also use seeker when you're reviewing local actions, of course, after the LWRP is completed. But just to note that your municipal attorney should be consulted to make sure that seeker is being complied with. Before we go to 60-day review, we'd like to see the EAF and the determination of significance before 60-day review. And yeah, so so that documentation, if you have a grant, the seeker documentation is required as part of the grant as well. But that this process also needs to be discussed in the LWRP in relation to development of the LWRP itself. Then I'd mentioned this a little at the beginning. Another subsection of section 5 is a standard section. We provide guidelines for notification and review of state agency actions, very long name, and procedural guidelines for coordinating New York State Department of State LWRP consistency review of federal agency actions. So this lays out how, say, state parks would look at the LWRP, who they would coordinate with in your community, and timelines and things like that, and how if they need to review an action in one of their parks. So we have many communities that have a state park in a local community. So this is how that coordination works within the waterfront revitalization area. The template for this is in Appendix 10 of the new LWRP guidance. In the coastal area of New York State, you should include the state agency action coordination, federal agency action coordination, and then an additional list. A third subsection is a list of more targeted actions that, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to a different one. Sorry, strike that. That's section 6. That's next week. Sorry. Okay, so for this, you would just include the state agency act. So inland waterways should only include the state agency guidelines, not the federal agency guidelines. Then the last subsection is financial resources necessary to implement the LWRP. So this is a summary, or just a little blurb about different funding sources that would be beneficial for your LWRP, and how you're going to fund routine administration of the program, which wouldn't be grant sources, but through your own municipal funding. If there's private funding sources that might be helping with your program or envision for your program, or nonprofits. So laying out how the program is going to be funded. And of course that changes over time. So it doesn't have to be, specific as to amounts and things like that, but just general ideas of municipal and state agencies that could help with funding. Then another piece that we ask for in section 5 is a summary chart of those local laws and other actions that implement the policies. So this is relating the policies from section 3 to the local laws that you have or are about to adopt. The appendix 11 in the LWRP guidance 2024 has an example of this. This comes from the town of East Hampton on Long Island. So you can see on the left here is the different policies. So development policies are numbers 1 through 6. And then the town of East Hampton has listed the different local laws that relate to and can implement the development policies. So conservation easements, farmland preservation, subdivision and zoning code, flood hazard overlay. So this is something that we'd like you to put, or we require you to put in section 5. I think second page of this. Yeah, just showing the different categories of the policies and the local laws that implement them. Okay, so in summary, we've talked about all these various tools that implement the LWRP for section 5 of the LWRP. Existing local laws and regulations, and so consider amending them with the model local laws to increase resilience. There's a lot of information in there, take it bites at a time to absorb it, but there might be things that can help you with resiliency in your community. The new local laws and regulations are the consistency review law. And again, we have 3 templates in the appendix of the 2024 guidance document, and a harbor management law, which often is updates and revisions to a law you might already have or might need to be a new law. Other public and private actions, for example, a local development corporation or a harbor district. The local management structure, who's going to review the projects, how is that review going to proceed, the guidelines for notification review of state agency actions and federal actions, which we again provide that as an appendix in the LWRP guidance document, financial resources, and the summary chart of the local laws implementing LWRP policies. There's a lot in section 5 to cover. All right, so that's everything I have. So the first question was, where are the recordings of the presentations being posted? We don't know yet. Our web manager is helping us with that, but we'll send out an email notification when we have them posted. So we're not sure. It'll be on our Department of State under Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, but there's a lot of sub pages, so we'll let you know. The second one was, is the waterfront assessment form the same as the coastal assessment form? Is that what it's called now? I also have an old quick scan of coastal zone policies sorted by category. Is there an updated version of that? So, yeah, I might have confused people. So when I was talking about the coastal assessment form, I was talking about the waterfront assessment form. And just to clarify, there's a federal coastal assessment form. It's called the FCAF, which is what's used when somebody comes in with a project and it's reviewed by our consistency reviewers in the coastal zone, even if you don't have an LWRP. But the waterfront assessment form is the ones for LWRPs, and I was calling it the coastal assessment form, but it's the same. It was the same thing as what you were thinking of as the waterfront assessment form. On our and I said in my response that on our website there's this set of 44 coastal policies, the most updated set, and I believe there's a table of contents in there which just has them listed by the categories that you're talking about, which I think that's kind of what you mean as a quick scan version. But I wanted to say that when you do a review of a project for development project for consistency with the policies, you should be using the language in the policies themselves, not just the name of the policy. So anyway, you should use the whole. But then if you have an LWRP, you're going to be using your LWRP, and the explanations in the LWRP will have information that's not in this state 44 policies document that's on our website. So just to clarify, you'll use your LWRP section 3 when doing a local consistency review. So the timing of the local laws. So the local laws should actually be adopted after the 60-day review, because there might be comments on them that come in during 60-day review, and then community would have to adopt them twice if they had to make changes. And then there's also a gap of at least several months, or probably it's hard to say, but it gives more time if it's done after 60-day review anyway. And to clarify that the secret neg deck or pause deck would be done before 60-day, but the draft LWRP is not adopted before 60-day. It's just accepted by the community, submitted by resolution, Department of State, and we're going to talk about this next week as well. But stays draft until after the comments come in. We write a response to comments, working with you as the community. And then the LWRP and local laws would get adopted after the 60-day, but before Secretary of State approval. Joint LWRPs, yes, they are complicated. You're asking about the joint LWRP, and you're assisting with 2 towns and a village. It's been scoped as 3 LWRPs. So the positive aspect of the joint LWRP is that you've shared resources and a common vision for the shared waterfront. But you also can do that in individual LWRPs. And you should be working with your neighbors anyway, as I mentioned a little bit today, and we mentioned in previous sessions during this training. The administration of individual LWRPs is much easier than joint, and depending on the complexity of the joint LWRP. Sometimes it can work. I know that up in Clayton, it's the Clayton town that they have a joint planning board. And so they do the LWRP reviews, but they're small communities and tend to agree on most things. So in that sense, for them, it works. But as it gets more complex, it's definitely harder. You have to coordinate any changes to local laws implementing the LWRP, such as the consistency review law, and any future amendments to the LWRP would need to be coordinated. And just to clarify, for joint LWRPs, even if, with you calling it joint, it's always adopted locally by each community. Even if you had a joint planning board like the village and town of Clayton do, each community adopts the LWRP with their own village or town or city board. They have to have their own local laws, and they can be slightly different. They should be coordinated, but they don't have to be exactly the same. But should definitely be coordinated. Shouldn't have any major differences. Um, so I guess that's a little bit about pros and cons of joint LWRPs. They can be good or can be more complicated. The municipalities have to adopt zoning changes identified in Section 5 before the acceptance of the adoption of the LWRP. It depends. So if there's zoning changes that are related to land uses that you're proposing in the LWRP, and you know its magnitude and its uses. So if your vision of your community is to have a certain use, and the use that's there right now on the waterfront is diametrically opposite of what you're proposing, we ask for the zoning to be changed. However, it's something like design guidelines or I can't think right off the top of my head, but we need to evaluate what's being proposed in your LWRP and what you have with zoning. And our attorneys, we have a couple of attorneys that work with you on well, they work with us, and then if needed with you on looking at the zoning to see if it's in accordance with what you're proposing. So it's not a simple answer. It's not a yes or no. It, it needs to be evaluated. And if we did several LWRPs have taken longer because of zoning changes that are needed, but eventually, like Sackett's Harbor, we've gone through the process, and Alexandria Bay, and other ones have, they've determined that they need to change their zoning, and it gets done, and the LWRP will be based on that. If the LWRP recommends further investigation to determine the contents of a local law, can that substitute for implementation, like flood elevation? So again, it depends on the magnitude and use. It's usually with zoning, we're talking about uses that we need to see it change. But something like if the changing in flood elevations, that could be a study that's proposed in the LWRP as a project. So East Hampton is one example. They've done several. They did a coastal assessment and resiliency plan where they went into depth with different parts of their community about sea level rise and the impacts of what's happening in their community with engineering analysis. So, and then they're going even further with a new grant that they got from us. So, so that type of thing could be a proposed project in the LWRP. And you could apply for a grant from us to do that. Another one could be a wetland law. If you have wetlands you want to protect, there already are DEC wetland protections and federal wetland protections with Army Corps. But if you're looking to investigate a wetland law and want to apply for a grant to do that or do it on your own or whatever, that type of thing, I think wouldn't. So, and that's because there's already wetland protections for that. So I think that answers that question. Where is the consistency review law located on the LWRP preparation guidance? It's in Appendix 8. Also, where are the 44 inland waterway policies located? What Josh wrote on that. Thanks, Josh. So the Appendix 8 and the inland waterway policies, actually, the inland waterway policies are posted on our website now. So when we finish the guidance, we got them posted up there. So you go to LWRP, Local Waterfront Revitalization Programs, then look for the library, and the three sets of policies are up there: the 44 coastal, the inland waterway ones, and the Long Island Sound policies. Those sets of policies, all three, you have to search under the library, but they are there. Josh added something about when I was talking about when you asked about local laws, can investigation substitute? So any local law that's necessary to implement the LWRP, if there's, a major change proposed in your uses in your municipality, or some other large initiative, you would need to have those proposed laws drafted, as part of the, draft LWRP for approval. So just to note that the ones, if a zoning change is needed, then we would need to have those, drafted for the draft LWRP. And again, funding is available for that type of work as well. Okay. All right. Thanks for all the questions. We filled up almost all the time today. So our last session is next week at 9:30. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks and have a nice weekend. It's supposed to be nice.